Don't stop, the voice behind him muttered as headlights cut through the storm. But Marcus Reed's foot was already easing off the gas as sheets of rain hammered against his windshield, each drop snapping like tiny pellets of ice under the yellow glow of a flickering street lamp. And that's when he saw her, a figure hunched at the edge of the road, soaked through, arms wrapped tight around herself like she was trying to hold in whatever warmth she had left, her silhouette barely visible through the blur of water and motion. Just another shape most drivers would pass without a second glance. Just another story swallowed by the night. But something about the way she stood there, not waving, not calling out, just enduring, made his chest tighten in a way he couldn't explain, and for a moment the world narrowed to the rhythm of the wipers dragging back and forth and the low hum of his engine as cars behind him sped past, tires slicing through puddles, sending arcs of water across the pavement like they were erasing her from existence. And Marcus knew that feeling too well, the quiet kind of invisibility that didn't shout or demand attention but settled into your bones over time, the kind that told you without words that you didn't matter enough for anyone to stop. And his grip on the steering wheel loosened just enough for instinct to take over before logic could catch up. The brake lights flaring red against the wet asphalt as his car slowed, then stopped, the engine idling as the storm pressed in from all sides, muffling the world into something smaller, more intimate, more real. And for a second he just sat there, watching her through the glass, the way her shoulders trembled, the way her hair clung to her face, the way she didn't look up even when his headlights illuminated her fully, like she had already decided no one would, like hope was something she had set down a long time ago. And Marcus exhaled slowly, the warmth of the car wrapping around him in contrast to the cold just inches beyond the door, a line so thin it almost felt like a choice between two different lives. And he reached for the handle, the metal cool beneath his fingers as he pushed the door open, the sound of rain instantly louder, sharper, real, soaking into his jacket within seconds as he stepped out, his boots splashing against the shallow water pooled along the curb. And when he moved closer, she flinched slightly, not dramatic, not fearful in a loud way, just a small, practiced reaction, the kind that came from too many moments like this, too many unknowns, too many times learning that the world could shift without warning. And he stopped a few feet away, careful not to close the distance too quickly, his voice steady, low, enough to match the quiet tension hanging in the air. "Hey, you don't have to stay out here," he said, the words simple, unpolished, but carrying something heavier beneath them, something honest. And she didn't respond right away, just lifted her eyes for a fraction of a second, long enough for him to see how tired they were, not just from the rain or the cold, but from something deeper, something that had been building long before tonight. And the silence stretched between them, filled only by the steady drumming of water against pavement and metal and skin, until he added, softer this time, "It's freezing, at least let me get you out of the rain." And even then she hesitated, her fingers tightening around the thin plastic bag she carried like it held everything she had left, like stepping forward meant risking more than just getting into a stranger's car, like it meant deciding whether or not to trust the world again, even just a little. And Marcus didn't rush her, didn't step closer, didn't fill the silence with more words than necessary. He just stood there, letting the moment breathe, letting her see that he wasn't going anywhere, that for once, someone had stopped and wasn't already looking for a way to leave. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted in her posture, not a full step, not yet, but enough to suggest that maybe, just maybe, the night wasn't going to end the way she expected it to. She shifted her weight slowly, like every inch forward had to be negotiated with something inside her that had learned to expect disappointment. And when she finally stepped closer, the rain traced lines down her face that could have been tears if they had not been so cold, her voice barely rising above the storm when she spoke. "Where would you even take me?" And it was not suspicion in the way people imagined it, not sharp or accusing, but tired, like the question had been asked too many times with answers that never held. And Marcus let out a quiet breath, glancing back toward his car where the interior light glowed faint and steady against the dark street. "Somewhere warm first," he said, simple, honest, not offering more than he could give. And that seemed to matter because she studied him for a moment longer, eyes searching not for promises but for cracks, for the small tells that people missed when they lied, and finding none, Or maybe just finding less than she expected. She nodded once, small and controlled, before taking the last step forward, her shoes making a soft, soaked sound against the pavement as she moved past him toward the open passenger door, hesitating again when she reached it, her hand hovering just above the frame, as if the boundary of that car meant more than shelter, like crossing into it meant stepping into a space where she might have to believe something again. And Marcus did not rush her. He simply stepped back, giving her room, letting the decision stay hers. And after a second that stretched longer than it should have, she ducked inside, pulling the door closed with a muted thud that sealed out most of the storm, leaving only a softened echo of rain tapping against the glass. And the shift was immediate, the warmth of the heater wrapping around her, the faint scent of clean fabric and coffee lingering in the air, the quiet hum of the engine grounding everything in something steady, something safe. And Marcus walked around the front of the car, the rain soaking through his jacket before he slipped back into the driver's seat, shaking off a few drops as he closed the door. The interior suddenly smaller, more contained, two strangers sitting within arm's reach but separated by everything they did not yet know about each other. And for a moment neither of them spoke, the windshield wipers continuing their steady rhythm as he adjusted the heat, turning it up just enough so the vents sent a gentle stream of warm air toward her, and he noticed the way her hands hovered near them, not touching, just feeling, like she was reminding herself what warmth felt like, and that small detail said more than anything she could have explained. So he kept his voice low when he finally spoke again. "Seatbelt is right there," he added, not as a command, just a quiet suggestion, and she followed it. The click of the buckle soft but final, like another small decision made. And as he pulled the car back onto the road, tires cutting through the water in smooth arcs, he glanced at her briefly, noticing how she sat upright, alert, not relaxed but not as guarded as before, her eyes moving across the dashboard, the mirrors, the passing lights outside, taking everything in with a kind of awareness that did not match the image of someone people would ignore on the street. And the silence returned, but it felt different now, less like distance and more like something forming, something waiting. And after a few blocks she spoke again, quieter this time, almost to herself. "It has been a while since I have been this warm." And the words lingered in the space between them, simple, but heavy with everything they did not say. And Marcus nodded once, keeping his eyes on the road. "Then we will fix that tonight," he replied, not grand, not dramatic, just certain. And outside the rain continued to fall, but inside the car, for the first time that night, it no longer felt like the world was closing in. The city stretched out ahead in long ribbons of light and shadow, reflections trembling across rain-soaked asphalt as Marcus guided the car through familiar streets that felt different tonight, quieter somehow, like the storm had pressed pause on everything except the steady rhythm of movement inside his vehicle. And beside him Emily sat with her hands now resting closer to the heater vents, fingers slowly uncurling as warmth returned in small, cautious waves, her shoulders no longer as tight as before though not fully relaxed, like she had not yet decided if comfort was something she was allowed to accept. And Marcus noticed the way her gaze followed details most people ignored, the flicker of a neon sign outside a closed diner, the digital clock on the dashboard ticking forward minute by minute, the way he checked his mirrors before every lane change, not out of habit alone, but out of a quiet sense of responsibility that seemed to settle over everything he did. And after a few more blocks he spoke again, not looking at her directly, keeping his tone steady so it would not feel like pressure. "There is a place about 10 minutes from here, open all night, good coffee, warm lights. Nobody asks too many questions." And he let the words sit there, not asking if she agreed, just offering the option like something she could take or leave. And she turned her head slightly, studying him again, this time with less distance, more curiosity. "You do this often?" she asked, not accusing, just observing. And Marcus shook his head once, a small movement. "No," he said, "not often." And that answer seemed to settle something because she nodded faintly, as if confirming a thought she had already been forming. And the silence returned, but it felt different now. Not empty, but filled with small, unspoken recognitions. And outside the rain softened just enough that individual drops could be seen tracing paths down the glass, instead of merging into one endless sheet. and as they passed under a streetlight, the glow illuminated her face more clearly, revealing details that the darkness had hidden before, the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes. The way her posture carried both caution and something else, something steadier beneath it. And then she spoke again, quieter but more certain. "My name is Emily." And the introduction felt simple but carried weight, like it was not something she gave freely. And Marcus nodded, a hint of a smile touching his expression even though his eyes stayed on the road. "Marcus," he replied, and saying his name out loud seemed to shift the space between them in a subtle way, like they were no longer just two strangers passing through the same moment, but two people who had chosen to acknowledge each other. And Emily let the name settle, repeating it softly under her breath as if testing how it sounded. "Marcus." And for the first time, there was something almost familiar in her tone, like she was remembering how conversations used to begin before everything became about survival. And Marcus adjusted the heat again slightly, noticing how the windows had begun to fog at the edges, the warmth inside now strong enough to push back against the cold outside. And as the car turned onto a quieter street lined with dim storefronts and flickering signs, Emily's eyes moved once more, this time lingering on a closed bookstore with handwritten notes taped to the glass. And something in her expression shifted, just for a second, something thoughtful, almost distant, like a memory brushing against the surface. And Marcus noticed but did not ask, understanding without words that some things needed time before they could be spoken. And so he kept driving, steady and unhurried, the soft hum of the engine and the fading rain wrapping around them like a quiet promise that for now, at least, they had somewhere to go. The diner came into view as a soft glow against the damp night, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. A flickering neon sign humming quietly above the entrance as Marcus eased the car into the parking lot, the tires rolling over shallow puddles that reflected the light in broken pieces. And for a moment he did not turn off the engine, letting the familiar rhythm of the car linger just a little longer, as if giving her time to adjust to the idea of stepping into another space, another threshold. And Emily followed his gaze toward the building, her expression unreadable but calmer than before, the tension in her shoulders easing just enough to suggest that the storm outside had begun to lose its grip on her. And when he finally shifted the car into park, the engine softened into silence, leaving only the faint ticking of cooling metal and the distant sound of rain tapping lightly against the roof. "It is not much," Marcus said quietly, glancing toward the entrance where a warm amber light spilled onto the pavement. "But it is warm, and the coffee is good." And Emily nodded once, her eyes still fixed on the doorway, as if measuring it the same way she had measured the car earlier, weighing risk against something she could not quite name yet. And when he reached for the door handle, she moved a second later, not following him immediately, but not staying behind either, stepping out into the cool air where the rain had softened to a mist that clung lightly to everything it touched. And together they walked toward the entrance, their footsteps quiet, almost in sync without trying. And when Marcus pushed the door open, the sound of a small bell chimed above them, a gentle note that seemed almost out of place in a night like this. And the warmth inside wrapped around them instantly, carrying the scent of fresh coffee, toasted bread, and something sweet lingering in the background, the kind of place that had not changed much in years, with worn booths, soft yellow lighting, and a counter lined with stools that had seen countless quiet conversations. And a waitress behind the counter glanced up briefly, offering a small nod that acknowledged their presence without asking questions. And that simple gesture seemed to matter because Emily's posture shifted again, just slightly, like she was stepping into a space where she did not have to explain herself right away. And Marcus guided them toward a booth near the window, the glass still streaked with rain, blurring the outside world into soft shapes and colors. And as they sat across from each other, there was a brief pause, the kind that comes when two people realize they have moved from chance encounter into something more intentional. And Marcus reached for the menu, sliding it gently across the table toward her. "You can order anything you want," he said, his voice steady, leaving no room for hesitation in the offer. And Emily looked down at the menu, her fingers tracing the edges of the laminated surface as if she was reacquainting herself with something simple, something ordinary. And when she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than before, but clearer. "I have not sat in a place like this in a long time," she admitted. not with sadness but with a kind of distant honesty, and Marcus nodded, not interrupting, letting her words settle naturally. And after a moment she glanced up, meeting his eyes more directly than she had before. "Why did you stop?" she asked, not sharply, not defensively, but with genuine curiosity now, like the question had shifted from survival to understanding, and Marcus leaned back slightly, the soft hum of the diner filling the space between them as he considered the simplest answer. "Because I saw you," he said finally, and the way he said it carried no extra weight, no need to explain further. And Emily held his gaze for a second longer than before, something in her expression changing in a way that was quiet but undeniable, like a small piece of something lost had just been found again, even if she was not ready to name it yet. The waitress approached with a quiet efficiency that matched the calm of the diner, her pen poised above a small notepad as she offered a simple smile that did not linger too long, as if she understood that some tables needed space more than conversation. And Marcus gestured lightly toward Emily, letting her speak first without saying it out loud. And for a moment Emily hesitated, her eyes scanning the menu again even though she had already read it, as if choosing something as simple as a meal carried more weight than it should. And then softly she said, "Just coffee, and maybe toast," her voice steady but careful, like she was testing the permission to ask for something small. And Marcus nodded once, adding, "Make that 2 coffees, and whatever she wants, please," his tone calm but certain, leaving no room for doubt that the choice was hers. And when the waitress nodded and walked away, the quiet returned, filled with the low hum of conversation from other tables and the soft clink of dishes somewhere behind the counter. And Emily's fingers rested lightly on the edge of the table now, no longer gripping anything, no longer folded tightly into themselves. And that small change did not go unnoticed. And Marcus leaned back slightly, giving her space while still present, his posture relaxed but attentive, and after a few seconds she spoke again, not looking at him directly this time, her gaze fixed on the blurred reflection of streetlights through the rain-streaked window. "People usually do not stop," she said, her voice calm but carrying something deeper beneath it, not bitterness, not anger, just a quiet truth shaped by repetition. And Marcus nodded slowly. "I know," he replied, and he did not add more, because anything extra would have sounded like an explanation, and she did not seem to want one. And the simplicity of that exchange settled between them in a way that felt heavier than a longer conversation. And when the coffee arrived, the warmth of the mug seemed to draw her attention immediately, her hands wrapping around it instinctively, holding it close like something familiar, something grounding, and she closed her eyes for just a second, breathing in the faint aroma before taking a small sip, careful, as if even that warmth might disappear if she moved too quickly. And Marcus watched without staring, noticing the way her shoulders lowered another fraction, the way her breathing evened out just enough to suggest that the space they were in had begun to feel real to her, not temporary, not fragile. And after a moment she opened her eyes again and looked at him, this time without hesitation. "You said you saw me," she said quietly, repeating his words from before, not questioning them but turning them over, examining them. And Marcus met her gaze, steady and unguarded. "Yeah," he answered simply, and she studied him for a second longer, as if deciding whether to believe that something so simple could still exist. And then she gave a small nod, almost to herself, before adding, "Most people look through you, like you are not really there." And her voice did not break, it did not rise, it remained calm, which somehow made it more powerful. And Marcus rested his hands lightly on the table, not reaching across, not closing the distance, just staying present in the moment. "Not tonight," he said, and the words were quiet but carried a weight that filled the space between them. And Emily's grip on the mug tightened just slightly, not from fear but from something else, something closer to recognition, like she was hearing something she had forgotten she needed. And outside the rain had almost stopped now, leaving only a soft mist against the glass. And inside the diner, under the steady glow of warm light, the distance between two strangers had shifted into something else, something quieter, but far more meaningful than either of them expected. The warmth of the diner settled deeper now, not just in the air but in the space between them, softening the edges of everything that had felt sharp only an hour before. And Emily held her coffee with both hands, the ceramic mug steady against her palms, as if she was anchoring herself to something real, something that would not disappear the moment she looked away, and Marcus sat across from her, quiet but present, not filling the silence with unnecessary words, understanding that sometimes the most important thing was simply not leaving. And outside the window the rain had faded into a thin mist that clung to the glass like a memory rather than a storm, the streetlights stretching into long golden streaks across the wet pavement, and inside, the low murmur of distant conversations blended with the occasional clink of silverware, creating a rhythm that felt almost like breathing, slow and steady, and Emily's gaze drifted again, not away from him but through the moment, as if she was standing in two places at once, one here in the warmth, and one somewhere far behind it, somewhere colder, quieter, and after a long pause she spoke, her voice softer than before but clearer, as if something inside her had decided it was safe enough to surface. I used to come to places like this after work, she said, not looking down, not hiding, just remembering, and Marcus did not interrupt, did not ask what kind of work, did not pull at the thread. He simply listened, and she continued, her tone even, controlled, but carrying something deeper beneath it. Late nights, long days, coffee like this felt like a reward back then, and she let out a faint breath that could have been a quiet laugh if it had held more warmth. But it did not. It stayed somewhere in between, and Marcus nodded slightly, his fingers resting loosely on the table. Sounds like you worked hard, he said, and it was not a question, just an acknowledgement, and that seemed to matter because Emily's eyes shifted back to him, meeting his gaze without hesitation this time, and for a moment there was no distance in it, no guarded edge, just a quiet recognition of being seen. And then she looked back at her cup, her thumb tracing the rim slowly. Thoughtfully, I did, she said, and the words carried more weight than they should have, as if they were holding something back, something not yet ready to be spoken, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of things unsaid, full of moments waiting for the right time, and Marcus leaned back slightly, not retreating but giving her room to breathe, to choose what came next, and the clock above the counter ticked forward, unnoticed by most, but steady in its quiet presence, marking time in a way that felt different here, slower, more deliberate, and Emily closed her eyes briefly, just for a second, as if gathering something inside herself, and when she opened them again there was a subtle shift, something steadier, something more certain, and she looked at Marcus. Once more, her voice still calm, but carrying a quiet strength now. It is strange, she said, how quickly people forget who you were, when you stop fitting into their world. And the words landed softly but with a depth that lingered, and Marcus did not respond immediately, not because he did not understand, but because he did, and he knew that rushing to fill that space would break something that was just beginning to form. And so he simply nodded, his expression steady, his presence unchanged, and across the table Emily's grip on the mug relaxed slightly, her shoulders lowering just a fraction more. And in that small, almost invisible shift, something important happened, something quiet but undeniable, the beginning of trust not built on promises or explanations, but on something far simpler, someone staying, someone listening, someone not looking away, and for the first time in a long time, the silence did not feel like absence, it felt like peace. Emily's words lingered in the air long after she finished speaking, settling between them like something fragile but undeniable, and Marcus felt the weight of it not as something distant, but as something familiar, something he had learned to carry in his own way, though never quite like hers, and he let a quiet moment pass before responding, his voice low and steady. People forget fast, but that does not mean you stopped being that person, and the simplicity of the statement did not try to fix anything, did not try to undo what she had been through, but it placed something back in front of her that the world had taken away, and Emily looked at him differently then, not guarded, not cautious, but searching, as if measuring the truth in what he said against everything she had experienced, and for a second it seemed like she might look away again, retreat back into the quiet distance she had been holding on to all night. But she did not. She stayed, her eyes steady, her voice quieter. Now, but more certain. I was an attorney, she said, and the words did not come with pride or regret, just clarity, like a fact that had been waiting to be acknowledged, and Marcus nodded once, not surprised, not questioning, just accepting it as it was. And that reaction seemed to matter more than anything else, because Emily's shoulders lowered just slightly, as if she had been bracing for disbelief that never came. And she continued, her gaze drifting briefly to the window before returning to him. Corporate law, contracts, negotiations, things most people do not think about until something goes wrong. And there was a faint shift in her tone now, something closer to the person she used to be, precise, composed, and Marcus leaned forward just a little, not intruding, just showing that he was listening. Sounds like you were good at it, he said, and she let out a small breath, almost a quiet exhale of acknowledgement. I was, she replied, and this time there was no hesitation in it, no doubt, just truth. And for a moment the diner seemed to fade slightly around them, the sounds softening into the background as something more personal took its place, and Emily's fingers moved from the rim of the cup to rest lightly on the table, her posture more open now, more present. And then she added, until everything changed, and the words were simple, but they carried a depth that did not need explanation yet, and Marcus did not press for it, did not ask what happened, because the way she said it made it clear that the story would come when it was ready, not before, and instead he nodded slowly, his expression calm, steady. Life does that sometimes, he said, not as a dismissal but as a recognition, and Emily studied him again, this time with something new in her gaze, not just curiosity, not just caution, but respect, quiet and growing. And outside the last traces of rain slid down the glass in slow lines, the storm now nothing more than a memory clinging to the edges of the night. And inside the diner, under the soft glow of warm light, the distance between who she had been and who she was now did not feel as wide as it had before, not because anything had been fixed, but because for the first time in a long while, someone had listened without turning away, and that simple act had shifted something deeper than words could reach. Emily's words faded into the quiet hum of the diner, but something in her expression remained, something unresolved, like a door left slightly open, and Marcus could see it in the way her fingers stilled against the table. No longer tracing patterns, no longer searching for distraction, just resting there as if she had reached a point where holding back required more effort than letting go. And for a moment neither of them spoke, the silence stretching but not breaking, filled instead with the soft clatter of dishes and the low murmur of distant voices. And then she inhaled slowly, a breath that seemed to gather more than just air. And when she spoke again her voice was steady, not fragile, not distant, but grounded in something real. I trusted the wrong people, she said, and the simplicity of it carried weight. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just honest. And Marcus did not interrupt, did not shift, he simply listened, his presence unchanged. And Emily continued, her gaze fixed somewhere between the table and the window, as if the memory was not something she needed to look directly at to see clearly. A case, a contract I reviewed, I flagged something that did not sit right, and her tone shifted, slightly now, more precise, more like the attorney she had described. It looked clean on the surface, but the language was structured to hide liability, to move risk where it should not go, and she paused briefly, her fingers pressing lightly against the edge of the table as if anchoring herself to the present while she spoke about the past. I raised concerns, pushed back, but the people above me did not want delays. They wanted signatures. And Marcus's expression remained steady, but there was a subtle tightening in his focus, not from judgment, but from understanding the shape of what she was saying. And Emily let out a quiet breath before continuing. When everything came apart, when the consequences showed up exactly where I said they would, they needed someone to take the fall. And her voice did not rise, it did not break, it stayed even, which made the words land heavier. And she looked at him then, directly, not hiding, not softening it. And I was the easiest one to erase. And the statement settled between them, not as a complaint, not as something seeking sympathy, but as a fact that had reshaped her life in ways no one in that room could fully see. And Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing it, not reacting with shock or disbelief, just acknowledging the truth of it. And that reaction seemed to matter because Emily's shoulders lowered slightly, as if she had expected resistance that never came. And she continued, quieter now. Reputation is everything in that world. Once it is gone, everything else follows. And she glanced down at her coffee, now half empty. The warmth still there, but less intense. Clients disappeared, opportunities closed, and suddenly, I was not someone people called anymore. And she paused, her fingers curling slightly around the mug again, not for warmth this time, but for something steadier, and Marcus leaned forward just a fraction, his voice calm. That does not erase what you know, or who you are, he said, not as reassurance, but as something grounded, something real, and Emily held his gaze for a long second, something shifting behind her eyes, something quieter than emotion, but just as powerful, like a recognition. She had not allowed herself to accept until now, and outside the last drops of rain slid down the window and disappeared, leaving the glass clearer than before, and inside, under the steady glow of light, the distance between her past and her present did not feel as absolute as it had, not because the damage was undone, but because for the first time, someone had heard the truth without turning it into doubt, and that changed something, even if only by a fraction. The last of the coffee had gone quiet in their cups, the warmth now lingering more in the space between them than in the drink itself, and outside the window the storm had fully passed, leaving the streets washed clean, reflecting the soft glow of streetlights and long, steady lines that no longer trembled, and inside the diner time seemed to slow, not in a dramatic way, but in the kind of quiet stillness that settles when something important has already happened and does not need to be announced, and Emily sat with her hands resting loosely around the empty mug, no longer holding it for warmth or grounding, just letting it be there, like everything else in the moment, and Marcus leaned back slightly in his seat, his posture relaxed but present, not withdrawing, not pushing forward, simply staying. And after a while Emily spoke again, her voice softer now, but no longer weighed down. I kept thinking, if I could just explain it to someone, they would understand, she said, her eyes drifting briefly toward the window before returning to him. But no one stayed long enough to listen, and Marcus nodded slowly, his expression steady. Sometimes people decide before they hear the truth, he replied, and she gave a small, almost thoughtful nod, not in agreement alone, but in recognition, like she had spent too long trying to prove something to people who had already chosen not to see it. And the silence that followed did not feel heavy anymore. It felt complete, like a conversation that had reached the place it needed to reach without forcing anything further, and Marcus glanced toward the counter briefly before looking back at her. There is a shelter a few blocks from here, he said, his voice calm, offering information without expectation. Clean, safe, open all night. And Emily listened, her gaze steady, not reacting immediately, and after a moment she nodded once, slowly. That sounds good, she said, and there was no hesitation in it this time, no uncertainty, just acceptance of the next step, and they both stood a few minutes later, the quiet scrape of the booth against the floor barely noticeable against the soft hum of the diner, and as Marcus left cash on the table, more than enough to cover what they had ordered, the waitress gave a small, knowing nod that carried no questions, only quiet understanding, and when they stepped outside the air felt different, cooler but lighter. The absence of rain making everything seem clearer, more defined, and Emily paused for just a second on the sidewalk, looking up at the sky as if confirming that the storm was truly over, and then she looked at Marcus, not with caution, not with distance, but with something steadier, something that had grown in the space between them without either of them forcing it. Thank you, she said, and the words were simple, but they held more than gratitude, they held acknowledgement, recognition. Something deeper than either of them needed to explain, and Marcus gave a small nod, not brushing it off, not making it bigger than it needed to be. You are welcome, he replied, and they walked side by side toward the car, their steps quiet but aligned, and as they drove the short distance through streets that now felt calm instead of empty, neither of them rushed to fill the silence, because it no longer needed to be filled, and when the shelter came into view, its lights steady and warm against the night, Marcus slowed the car to a stop, and Emily reached for the handle, pausing just briefly before opening the door, and before she stepped out she looked back at him one more time, not searching, not questioning, just holding the moment, and then she nodded again, a quiet promise of something unspoken, before stepping into the light, and Marcus watched for a second as she walked toward the entrance. Her steps no longer hesitant, no longer uncertain, And when the door closed behind her, he did not drive away immediately. He just sat there, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, the engine idling softly. And for the first time that night, the silence did not feel like emptiness. It felt like something had begun, something small, something real, something that would not disappear with the storm.